Shalom, shalom, and welcome to the Yap Gang Scholarship Channel. Today's topic, we're going to be dealing with who are the sons of Ham, and I'm going to give you guys my breakdown, my understanding, and, go over a couple studies, trying to locate and pinpoint the best proxies for the sons of Ham, right? So we already discussed Noah, what time period Noah most likely lived in, which was between 100 and 200,000 years ago. Now we're going to deal with his children and deal with the initial dispersal of humans after the bottlenecking event known as Noah's flood. Right, so I will be presenting my hypothesis, which goes along with our theory. A theory is an interpretation of the facts, to try to pinpoint who or which populations best fit each son of Noah. And we will not be using the Judeo-Christian traditional time frame, because those time frames do not account for a bottlenecking event, a global bottlenecking event, which is what we see being told or foretold in the book of Genesis. All right, so with that being said, let's get right into it. I'm going to pull my PowerPoint presentation up, and I hope you guys enjoy the presentation. Hope you guys learned something and are intrigued by our analysis. All right, let's go to reading view. Ham. Who are the Hamites? Before I get started here, the funny thing about discussing who's Ham and who's Shem, who's Japhet, for many years, Christians, non-Christians, Arabs, Ishmaelites, or whatever you want to call them, Islamic, people of Islamic faith, Christian faith, Jewish faith, what they would tend to do is try to use the modern racial system to break down what population group would belong to each son of Noah. So they would say all Black people descend from Ham, which is erroneous, because Black people are African people, or what have you. Anyone with dark skin complexion, they all share different Y chromosomes, meaning they all share different male distinct lineages. So they all could not go back to a man named Ham, right? Another error that I see is putting Noah 4,400 years before present. That's not enough time to account for all the diversification that we see on the planet Earth within human populations. For example, the San people, and then you have the Mbuti people, then you have the Yoruba people, then you have the Yamnaya, you have so many people groups. You have the Han Chinese, you have the early Japanese, you have the Negrito population. You don't have enough time to explain that amount of diversification with just 4,400 years. So again, to correct the models, the best time frame to place them would be placing Noah around 200, 100,000 years ago, and using skin color to try to delineate people groups is a terrible barometer. So no, we're not using skin color to suggest what son of Noah people groups descend from. Again, if Noah did exist, his three sons would represent the extant population that we see on the planet Earth. And today we're dealing with the sons of Ham. So I got 4 points here. The best source population to represent Ham will be ancient Nubians, which will be known as Kush. And we know Kush is said to be a son of Ham. So we're going to use Kush, the ancient Kushites, as a proxy to identify the Hamites and what people group today best, are mostly related to these people. Ancient Kushites are all downstream markers of haplogroup A, so that gives you, a nugget there to let you know what group of individuals. Again, what does haplogroup mean? A group of individuals that share what? A common ancestor. And we're dealing with Y DNA here because we're dealing with Ham, which is a male. He would have Y DNA. All ancient Kushites share those downstream markers of haplogroup A, meaning they share a common male ancestor. Haplogroup A and B represent the best proxies for the sons of Ham. Hamites are people who retain downstream markers of haplogroup A and B, and downstream markers just mean descendants, progeny, right? Upstream means ancestral, downstream means descendants. And we will address, I thought we all come from haplogroup A. We all come from haplogroup A at the root, but then you have groups that split off and develop downstream markers like the M13 and the BM60 SNPs, and they have their own separate distinct lines. We do not share those lines. And when I say we, I'm talking about the rest of humanities that fall outside of haplogroup A and B. So those that retain A and B downstream markers would be great proxies for the sons of Ham. Again, this has nothing to do with skin color or physical appearance. Paleo-Africans is the group that we're deeming as Hamites. And to the right, you can see a phylogenetic tree. We all come from the root of the tree, which we're going to call Y chromosomal Noah. Again, I placed Y chromosomal Noah between 100 and 200,000 years ago. As you can see, the A and B groups split off and they make their own distinct clusters, as all A and B groups have their own separate clusters as well, as you can see on the screen. And that source is from Klyosov DNA genealogy. So again, to just recapitulate, Noah's lineage is around 100 to 200,000 years ago. It says here that the congruence of these fields support the view that modern human mitochondria and Y chromosomes originated from conditions that imposed a single sequence on these genetic elements between 100 and 200,000 years ago. In layman's terms, that single sequence is a bottlenecking event. In the Bible, it talks about a global bottlenecking event known as Noah's flood. I believe that this will be a great era to place Noah, because you do see a bottlenecking event where Y chromosomes and mitochondrial DNA convergence, meaning you see a reduction of population, and then humans have to have a quote unquote restart after this period. It says here, contemporary sequence data cannot tell whether mitochondrial Y chromosome clonality occurred at the same time, i.e. consistent with the extreme bottleneck of a founding pair, or via sorting with a founding population of thousands that was stable for tens of thousands of years. And the source here is Why Should Mitochondria Define Species? Rockefeller.edu, Stokler and Thaler, 2018. So it's important that we reaffirm that the time period is 100 to 200,000 years ago. It's the only way it's going to make sense. That's given enough time for diversification of the globe, human populations throughout the globe. It says here, source population Kush. Again, that will be our proxy. Our source population will be ancient Kush, which is Nubia, which is Sudan, right? So when you look at the Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus, book 1, chapter 5, it states how every nation was denominated from their first inhabitants. So according to Josephus, he believes that the first inhabitants would be the representatives of, the Hamites, Shemites, in their respective lands. So when we have the Hamites here, it mentions Kush. It says, of the four sons of Ham, Tom has not at all heard the name of Kush. Why does he say that? Because prior to him making this statement, he says the names of Kush could not be found in Asia, or the names of Ham, rather, not be found in Asia. They have been lost in time. But the name of Kush, the son of Ham, is still being retained in what he known in his day as Ethiopia, which again, this is not the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia. This is Sudan. Okay, when you see the Bible talking about Ethiopia, it is talking about the locality that is now known as Sudan. So let's read it again. It says, four of the four sons of Ham, time has not at all heard the name of Kush. For the Ethiopians over whom he reigned are even at this day, both by themselves and by all men in Asia, called Kushites. So when we're dealing with these Ethiopians, again, these are Sudanese people. So we're going to deal with the ancient Kushites, who they were, what haplogroups they had. It also says the memory also of the Meserites is preserved in their name, for all we who inhabit this country of Judea called Egypt Mesri, and the Egyptians Meserians. And again, the source is Antiquities of the Jews, book 1, chapter 5. So very early Nubians, very early Egyptians would represent these children of Ham. The Oxford Handbook of Nubia. So within this book, it talks about the argument of pre-dynastic Egypt actually being, a product of Nubia, right? So in this book, it states, exemplary in this respect is a debate that followed the publication in 1980 by Bruce Williams of a report on Cemetery L of Kutzel. The unmistakably rich graves of this small cemetery located just north of the modern border between Egypt and Sudan and excavated by the Oriental Institute of Chicago in the 1960s were unique in the A group funerary panorama. Some of the tombs had unusual architecture and incredibly large size. There was a wealth and variety of funerary offerings, including rare imports from Egypt and even from the Levant. So these early Nubians had a connection to the Levant even during this time, the pre-Nakada period, pre-dynastic period. Since there were a few objects decorated following Egyptian royal iconography of the Nakada third period, thus preceding the first dynasty, to Williams, tombs with such size and wealth in Egypt would have been recognized as royal. And because they predated any royal graves known at that time in Egypt, he proposed Kutzel was a birthplace of pharaonic civilization several generations before the rise of the first historic Egyptian dynasty. So one can make the argument that pre-dynastic Egypt had a connection with Nubians. So now let's deal with who are the Nubians. Analysis of DNA samples from the burial sites in northern Sudan, pre-Kerma, supported predominance of Y haplogroup A during the Mesolithic, Middle Lithic meaning stone. So during the Middle Stone period, there was a predominance in northern Sudan, which is Nubia, aka Kush, of Y haplogroup A. The ancient peoples of Kush would have been Y haplogroup A. So again, what is a haplogroup? A group of individuals that share a common ancestor. And when we deal with the Y DNA haplogroup, that's a group of individuals that share a common male ancestor. So if these are the ancient Kushites, then you would expect to see other A groups and other B groups that share the same male ancestor. And if we're using a biblical backdrop for phylogeny, then we would say that these people would have to be Ham. The source is Ibrahim Muntazer, Genetics of African Population, and it's page number 47. So just to recapitulate where Kush is, Kush, the state that grew from the city now known as Kerma or Kerman Kush, was the earliest African state south of Egypt to have a fully historical presence. And that's the Oxford Handbook Ancient Nubia, page number 179. Just to remind you guys where Kush is. Anytime you see Kerma, that's talking about Kush. Anytime you see Kush, that's talking about Nubia. Right? And that's talking about Sudan. It's right below modern Egypt. And here is an ancient identifier of Kush. It states a tomb inscription from El Kab in Upper Egypt narrates how war parties from Kush raided for booty in the region during the 17th dynasty. Source: the Oxford Handbook of Ancient Nubia, page number 173. There are many other ancient sources that were found in the ground around that area that mention Kush. So there is no mistaking where these Kushites were. And again, the ancient haplogroup that's found amongst them is haplogroup A. Haplogroup A is associated with them. Therefore, we're using the Kushites as a proxy to determine who are the sons of Ham. So Sand ancestry, if you don't know about the Sand people, they have A markers amongst them as well, right? It says here, persistent detection of low levels of sun-affiliated ancestry among ancient Eastern African individuals is more difficult to explain. One possibility is the ongoing interactions with an as of yet undetected hunter-gatherer population whose ancestry is primarily shared with the modern sun. Another possibility is that the sun-related ancestry reflects an earlier, wider distribution of African foragers stretching from southern to eastern Africa, which existed before mid to late Holocene migrations of farmers and herders. Linguistic and genetic parallels between eastern and southern African foragers groups using click consonants make it tempting to hypothesize the presence of an early, widely distributed click language-speaking population. So, in a nutshell, this source is telling you that these A markers had a more wider distribution in Africa before incoming Afro-Asiatic speakers, pastoralists, and farmers. Many of these people were E markers that were displacing them and removing them. But prior to that, Africa pretty much was covered with these A markers and these B markers because they represent African foraging groups as well. The source here is ancient genomes reveal complex patterns of population movement, interaction, and replacement in sub-Saharan Africa. Key Wang et al. 2020, science.org. Same source, it says it demonstrates that across all regions studied, the earliest visible ancestry is closely related to that of the present-day hunter-gatherer populations, such as the San in southern Africa, the Hadza in eastern Africa, and the Mbuti of the Central African rainforest. A lot of those Mbuti have haplogroup BM60. These would be your putative Hamites. And as I stated before, Shemites did indeed displace Hamites. As we can see here, it said it appears that the E and L2/L3 expansions were strongest in Western Sahel and Western Guinea, where they replaced the majority of the oldest mtDNA and Y chromosome A and B lineages. And the source is carriers of mitochondrial DNA, macrohaplogroup L3 basal lineage, back migrated to Africa from Asia around 70,000 years ago by Vicente M. Cabrera et al. 2018, BMC. So just to recapitulate, you had A and B lineages that had a wider distribution in Africa until many of these E carriers would come in and begin to displace them. It says here at first glance, you might not notice anything unusual about their physical features. This is Nathaniel Jeeson, and he's discussing the Khoisan people. It says, while lighter skinned than a typical Sudanese, still have brown skin tone. Their tightly curled hair is also unmistakably associated with sub-Saharan Africa, but their eyes seem to tell a different story. Their shape does not resemble the common appearance of eyes among West and Central Africans. The Khoisan look different. In fact, they look more home in East Asia among the Chinese. Who did the Khoisan come from? So this is in his book, Human DNA's Big Surprise, page 38. Nathaniel Jeeson is posing the question, where did these Khoisan people come from? And it's very unique because the question has to be stated because of not only their physical appearance, we also see in their genes that they do have Eurasian genes. And I brought this slide up to show that people say, well, wouldn't Hamites be, somewhere in the Near East too as well? They are. And possibly you see these allele frequencies with their physical features, maybe that comes from outside of Africa as well. So let's get to the next slide. So here we go with Homo sapiens sapien distribution. As you can see, if you look at the Homo sapiens sapien dispersal, it starts somewhere in the gray area according to this reverse phylogeny paper that was released in 2020. And you can, hypothetically say that this dispersion happened here. And you can see Sun-related people and Buti-related people coming from this region as well. Maybe the Sun people retain some of those features that they would obtain in that shaded area in East Asia or somewhere around that area, and that's probably why they have those eye shapes. So with that, let's continue. A3M13 is typical of Eastern Africa, where it is found with a frequency as high as 40% and is prevalent in the Nilo-Saharan populations. In particular, among Nilotic pastoralists, A3M13 chromosomes have also been observed in Central and Northern Africa at frequencies ranging from 1 to 7%. Outside of Africa, this haplogroup has been found at very low frequencies in both the Middle East and Sardinia. So you do see A markers today in modern populations outside of Africa as well as within Africa, East, North, South, and West Africa. You do see these A markers all over. And that's from the peopling of the last Green Sahara revealed by high coverage resequencing of the trans-Saharan patrilineages by D. Atanasio et al. 2018 BMC. So we do still see remnants of these A markers even outside of Africa. A lot of people don't understand the concept of genetic drift. You can have populations that exist earlier in different localities, geographical locations, that you don't see them in present-day populations, at least not greatly represented. All right, so let's keep going. So also, I wanted to put this in this presentation as well. All humans do not descend from Sun people, because a lot of, you hear popular discourse, oh, all people come from the Sun. No, they don't. The Sun people have their own particular branch of a downstream of A. Most of the people outside of A and B have their own separate branch, as you can see here on the screen to the left. They have their own separate branch that they come from, which is hypothetical CT, right? These are separate branches. They have their own branch where they develop into A and B markers. We have our own branch where we branched off. And when I say we, I'm talking about mainly Yoruba people, because that's who I'm related to. And we developed into DE and downstream markers of EM96 and so on and so forth. So, Japanese people, Yoruba people, many of the people of the Igbo do not have the same ancestry as the Sun people. By and large, they're different groups of people. They have their own distinct lineages, which we do not share. We all have a common male ancestor, but we all have our separate branches on the family tree that we belong on. And the A and B people, as we designate as ham, have their separate branches. But it even states here, the deepest portion of the human Y chromosome, according to Kosari in all 2012 paper, the internal structure of some haplogroup B subclades not shown, black triangles. One can see that more than a half of the lineages are related to haplogroup A, which the authors call all African, apparently by default. All other subclades except one are related to haplogroup B, which the authors also call African, again by default. Haplogroup CT in the lower right-hand side contains, according to the authors of the study, 19 DNA lineages, all non-African. Kosari et al. 2012. SNP mutations show that non-Africans are not descendants of Africans of haplogroup A and B. Instead, they have a common ancestor of about 160,000 years ago. Again, it's congruent and more harmonious when you place Noah in this time period because of this. So those that retain A and B markers, that have downstream A and B markers, I designate that group as Hamites. One can notice, of course, that ancestors or bearers of the contemporary European Asian haplotypes of haplogroup A could have migrated out of Africa. However, it can be equally suggested that they could have migrated into Africa. Therefore, those arguments do not support the out of Africa concept. They are rather mute. For some mysterious reason, only the out of Africa alternative finds supports among proponents of the concept. And this again is Klyosov DNA genealogy, page number 155. Again, I'm going to show the reverse phylogeny chart, Homo sapien dispersal. You can easily say that these people had their origins somewhere in Asia, somewhere surrounding around somewhere in Asia. As you see, Yoruba coming from that point, the Sun and Buti and other people that are associated with African lineages today could have very well came from this shaded area here in Asia. And that's the paper here, Reversal Human Phylogeny by Arnason et al. 2020 BMC. And again, DNA Genealogy by Klyosov, page number 63. It says here, the finding that the Europeoid haplogroups do not descend from African haplogroups A or B is supported by the fact that bearers of the Europeoid haplogroups, as well as all non-African haplogroups, do not carry either SNPs M91, P97, M31, P82, M23, M114, P262, M32, M59, P289, P291, P102, M13, M171, M188, M118, haplogroup A in the subclase SNPs, or M60, M181, P90, which is haplogroup B, as it was shown recently in the walkthrough Y family tree DNA. So again, just to recapitulate, we do not descend from people like the Sun people or the Dinkas or early Nilotes. We don't descend from them. When I say we, I'm talking about everyone outside of this group, like your Yoruba, your Japanese, your JP58 barriers. Right? Many of the Jews today are JP58. Your early Europeoids and stuff of that nature don't necessarily descend from these groups, but rather share a common male ancestor. And that fits with the biblical model, because you have Ham, Shem, and Japheth all descending and breaking off, dispersing into their own distinct lineages, but they all share a common male ancestor at Noah. And that's how I show common phylogeny, the root of phylogeny of humans, overlapping it with a biblical model. Again, A and B, representing Ham because of that connection, ancient Kush, which is ancient Nubia, which is ancient Sudan, and they're primarily A markers. So a summation, Ham is best represented by the ancient Kushites, i.e. Nubians, i.e. Sudanese. Paleo-Africans are the best proxies for the putative sons of Ham. What are some of those Paleo-Africans? Your Sons and your Mbuti peoples, right, with haplogroup A and B. Haplogroup A and B carriers are great proxies for the sons of Ham. These events are postulated to happen between 100 and 200,000 years ago, after Noah's bottleneck. All right, so that's my explanation of the sons of Ham, most likely being descendants of A and B carriers. Hope you guys learned something, got something out the video. We'll continue this series. I will be explaining Japheth and Shem in subsequent videos. Subscribe to the Yap Game Scholarship channel, share the Yap Game Scholarship channel, and share this video on the various social media platforms. Get the word out here. And like I said, I appreciate you guys, and I hope you guys got something out of this. We out. Peace.